Welcome back to the Group Practice Accelerator Podcast, brought to you by Polaris Healthcare Partners, where we leverage decades of healthcare and business experience to drive growth and successful group practices just like yours. If you're a healthcare entrepreneur and you're interested in building, scaling, or exiting your group practice, you've found not only the industry's leading resource for business education, but a team of trusted advisors dedicated to helping you achieve and exceed your goals. In short, the team at Polaris creates clarity, confidence, and results. I'm your host, Jamie Falash, and the Group Practice Accelerator Podcast is on the air. Well, hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. We get a lot of listener questions throughout the year from other entrepreneurs just like you. So as we promise at the end of every episode, we're going to get back to those questions. So that's what we're going to do today. And some of the most common questions we get are around the topic of partnerships. So stick with me here and we'll share some inside baseball on things like structures, options in terms of models, different types of equity that you can use to offer ownership and help drive production, and even why establishing partners is really important when it comes time to plan for your own exit, and even if that's 5, 10, 15 years down the road. So here with me today to answer those burning listener questions is Polaris' own fearless leader, founder and CEO, Diwakar Sinha. Diwakar, welcome back to the show.
Jamie, thanks for having me.
Well, we get a lot of listener questions, so we're going to dive into that today and talk about partnerships. And I know you'll have a lot to say about this. I've talked to Mark Flock about this on a number of occasions, but I want to get your perspective on a few things here and kind of glean from your experience. In terms of ownership, and I know this can be a control issue for some people, what do practice owners or group owners need to be thinking about in terms of partnerships, and what can they do to kind of allay that fear of giving up control?
Sure. Yeah, so I think you hit the nail on the head. I think majority of the partnerships we see in the market are like 50-50 partnerships, or 25, 25, 25, 25, or a third, a third, a third. That's traditionally what we see in the market.
Okay.
And that's okay, right? That's historically how the market's done partnerships. But what people need to think about when setting up a partnership, if they have partnerships today and are thinking about bringing on partners, it is, what is control? And control for a lot of founders is the ability to drive day-to-day decisions and not have to go through every minutia of that process. So, we typically don't do 50-50 ownerships. And if they are set up 50-50, I think in most cases you can have a managing partner within the business that can drive most of the decisions. So I think the way you structure these deals on an operating agreement side, on a cap table side, which is the ownership percentage or ownership table side, I think is important to allowing the principal founders to feel comfortable that they have some level of control in the business. At the same time, I think you do need to go to minority shareholders and ask for their opinion, right? That's why you're making these people partners in your business, because you value them. You see them as part of your journey, part of your growth process. So I definitely want to implore that process. But I think this uncertainty around control can meaningfully be alleviated by understanding how the cap table is structured and the operating agreement and those factors.
Yeah, definitely, because you built this business of your own, and when it comes time to give up a little piece of that pie, I'm sure that can be really unnerving. So you want to have it structured just right from a legal perspective. We lean on our experts for legal advice and the right documentation up front. I'm sure that's important in an operating agreement as well. So when I'm thinking about bringing in a partner, say this is the first partner I'm bringing in, what are some of the options that I can look at and maybe walk through how some of those work I know I'm familiar with buy-ins, I'm familiar with earn-ins, but let's kind of separate those out a little bit and define them a bit for our audience if we can.
Yeah, so the buy-in on a technicality side is typically called capital interest, because somebody put capital into the business.
Okay.
And they could have taken a loan for it. They had money in their savings account, investment accounts. So whenever somebody buys in, they have capital interest within the business. And again, traditionally, those deals tend to be 50-50, right? This is like somebody would have started at one practice or two practices, brought in a partner at a meaningful level by taking on a bank loan. When you start to get to a 3, 5, 10 location, we tend to not see a meaningful partnership buy-in level. You start to see smaller buy-in levels. You still see that where somebody's becoming a partner at one location and writing a check for 200,000, 500,000, and they might be different ownership levels at each of the practice.
Okay.
Our goal is to kind of make it across the organization somewhat relatively the same, so there's a similar model across the platform. So that's a buy-in model. Somebody's buying in, writing a check. And again, typically at a practice level, you're going to see that anywhere from 20% to 49% in the market. We do see 50-50, but at an organization level, that might be a 1 to 5% buy-in level, depending on the size of the business.
Just from a 50-50 perspective, does that ever cause any issues with decision making?
Yeah, we're not big fans of it on a
Uh,
50-50 ownership. And I think most attorneys are not fans of it because at 50-50, you technically have two minority owners.
yeah.
So neither of them can make a decision.
I see some head butting there that could
Yeah.
take place potentially.
Yeah, and that's why I think, people look at that and say, well, I want to be able to make decisions. So I think if you structure a deal 50-50, you definitely have put yourself in a position where you can't make a decision. So I think, and that's why there's a lot of anxiety because traditionally the market's done 50-50. And
Yeah.
for that reason, we just haven't been able to evolve into a more progressive managing partner, somebody's a majority shareholder, that kind of process. We do see that a lot in growing organizations, but in the traditional partnership strategy, we don't. And hence, we've kind of implemented these earned in models that allow people to kind of think through and bring in minority shareholders that still have the opportunity to earn meaningful equity that can outperform any ownership process on their side, and still allow the principal founders to have control to drive the day-to-day operations, if they're 10 locations, 20 locations, and achieve the outcomes they're trying to get out there.
Okay. So with that said, let's talk about those earn-in models and what those can look like. And are those much smaller percentages, I'm assuming? And can you go through how that gets achieved over time?
Yeah, so the earn-in models, again, we do two different. So one is profits interest, and one is RSUs. Technically, it's RMUs, but we call it RSUs. It's easier to say.
Mhm.
So, in profits interest, traditionally, we see that for the doctors at the practice level. And that we can make it meaningful of 20%, 30%, 40%, up to even 50% of an upside, depending on how we're not just looking at that one practice, but we're looking at the consolidated enterprise and what the outcome is going to be in a forward-looking equity dilution, voting dilution, all aspects of it, right? We have to kind of think through on a forward basis, not on just on a practice by practice basis. So that could be meaningful for the junior partner or the practice partner at that location, because we definitely want to make sure that the equity they're realizing, one, is attainable,
Mhm.
practice has potential to get there, and two, that the equity amount they're going to realize over that period of 5 years or 10 years is meaningful. And meaningful is a very subjective answer because that's
Yeah.
going to change by specialty out there. So pedo, ortho, oral surgery, endo, general dentistry, even general dentistry, you have some producer producing 800,000, some producers producing $1.5 million. So the outcome we're solving for is meaningfully different in a profits interest. The RSU is now at the holding level traditionally. Not to say we can't do profits interest at the holding level. We've done profits interest at the holding level, but traditionally our RSU structures are at the holding level. And that's for executive equity, that's for doctor equity, that basically drives for production from the doctors, and we structure that in. And we look at, again, a 5-10 year model to determine how much equity will each doctor get over the time period of 5 to 10 years. How will the company dilute equity position? How can we reward the executives within the company to perform, to drive alignment within the business? Some businesses have executive equity, some businesses don't have executive equity, but how are you driving that direction within the business?
How, just thinking about this from a clinician perspective, does that model make it easier for docs to move between practices? Let's say I've got somebody out over at practice A. Can I use somebody that might be off from practice C to plug in there? Does that make more
Great.
sense for
Yeah.
that model?
Yeah. Yeah, Jamie, great insight. Yeah. If somebody's at a profits interest at a practice level, right? And they are, 10 miles away from another practice or 15 miles away from another practice, to get them to be a fill-in doctor at a practice they're not a shareholder in, that's a tall ask. So I
Yeah.
think people just need to be cognizant of it. Now, if you're in rural markets where the practices are 20 to 30 miles apart, you may not see that. And so again, we have to understand what profits interest does versus RSUs does in aspect. If you're a specialty, you typically have doctors that are rotating. So we have to kind of think about those aspects of it, like especially orthodontics, oral surgery, endo. Sometimes you have doctors that are rotating in practices, unless you have a pure specialty play in the practice. So in the RSU structure, it allows the doctors to focus on the organizational growth in addition to the practice growth, because obviously they're still tied to making sure that practice succeeds. Because if one practice drops, the organizational EBITDA drops. Okay.
Makes
At the
sense.
same time, they're vested for every practice to be successful collectively. And if you need them to go to that practice 10 miles away, now they're more vested to say, yeah, sure. Yeah, if Steve or Susan is out on vacation, I will be the relief doctor for that practice. You know, and how cool would it be for an associate doctor or a partner in another practice to say, hey, while I'm on vacation, my other partner is going to take care of you. So you're really getting top quality care while in the practice, and the practice is not shutting down. So I think there's meaningful outcome potentially from an RSU perspective at a holding company level.
I could see that being a great benefit across an organization, just to have that comfort of, oh, I'm sorry, the doctor's going to be out for 2 weeks. You're going to have to wait, versus we can still take care of you. This person's going to be providing your care while I'm away. I can see
Yeah, and
some
just
benefit
to
there.
see, a lot of companies, just to Jamie, are going towards cloud-based CRM, right, or practice management software. And so a lot of times patients may move from practice to practice,
Oh, yeah.
or
Good point.
scheduling might be something to think about. Hey, we can't get you in practice one with Dr. Steve, but we can get you with Dr. Susie. Let's say they're both doctors earning equity into a practice. Now that's not an issue because it's allowing the organization to grow, and we're taking care of the patient, right? It's not aligning with just a one practice's performance. It's aligning with taking care of the patient and the organizational performance. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of underlying benefits, especially if you go cloud-based practice management software and allow scheduling across a platform.
Yeah, that's something that didn't pop into my head from the clinical perspective before, that patients sometimes need different locations. Maybe there's one location near your home, maybe there's one by your office. So yeah, that makes perfect sense. All right, so let's talk timing. Like, when should, if I'm a doctor, I've got, maybe 3 locations. When should I be considering choosing RSUs versus profits interest units?
Yeah, so I mean, I always tell people I think of it 3, 5, or 25 locations.
Okay.
I think the issue, majority of the inquiries we get is when they have an associate that's providing a notice or saying, hey, if I don't get a partnership in the next 6 months, I'm going to
Oh,
look for another role, right?
yeah, we
And
don't
that's
want
more of
that.
a reactive. That's more of a reactive, right? And we're happy to facilitate that and provide a solution, but it's more of a reaction, and our clients are having to come to a conclusion that's rushed.
Yeah,
I
you give somebody
always,
an ultimatum, they're
yeah,
that's awkward at best.
Yeah, I'm more of a fan of having a solution in place that's empowering, that says, this is what I'm looking to build. Are you with me? So I
100%.
always encourage, if you're at 3, 15, or 25 locations, structure a partnership program that you feel good about. Okay. And offer it to your doctors. Some will say no, most will say yes. Okay. And one of the benefits about timing when you're not reacting to something is that you're at peace, you're excited about the product you're offering, you feel in control and when you're offering it. So I think all of that mindset matters aspect kind of translates into the success of the partnership program on how successful it becomes. So just being ahead of that, I think, is so important as far as timing.
Well, and just being organized and, like you said, thinking ahead, thinking out 3, 5, 10, 15 years down the road about what you want for your business, and setting it up in a professional manner, showing future employees when you're interviewing them, when you're talking about having them on board, when you're talking about offering equity, that you've already thought through all of this stuff. Like, look at what that does just for a recruitment perspective. If you've got all
Yeah.
this laid out ahead of time and you're not just, oh, wait, you want to be an owner? Let me think about that. To me, as an employee, I'd be like, next.
Yeah,
Probably
and
not.
many of the groups we've laid out the program for have pitch decks already built out.
That's perfect.
that allows them to say, not only here's our clinical practice, here's our vision for the next 5 years, but here's our partnership track, right? And that really differentiates them from the practice next door,
Yeah.
or that is out there. So I think that's a competitive edge to recruiting.
Yeah, for sure. And let's elaborate on that some more because that really speaks to the value of your business. So my next question is more around why is it important to have these partnership options in place and have partners in place when you're looking to scale and when you're looking to exit?
Yeah, so I think first step, recruitment wise, I think just really differentiates you in the market.
Mhm.
And when we try to take a business to an exit, we can say this has been the process of our client, that they go out and value proposition. They have this equity plan in place that allows them to recruit, retain, and develop doctors. I
Yeah.
mean, that's such a really powerful tool to be able to communicate in the market.
Yeah.
And one of the other things that ends up happening when you develop an equity program early in the process is that you align incentives, you align vision, you get everybody rowing in the same direction, and driving towards the same mission and purpose. And so now everyone's focusing on what is the patient care, what is the growth opportunity we're looking for, what is the profitability efficiency we're looking for. Previously we talked about utilization rate, making sure utilization rate when the practices are there, that we have everything working in the right direction. So that happens over the course of 12, 24, 36, 60 months. And that translates into higher valuation organically because EBITDA tends to improve. And then when we go to market and the business is transacting, you have many shareholders in the business that are on the cap table, many minority shareholders, but many minority shareholders. And that becomes really exciting from a buyer's lens because now we can communicate. We have 3 partners, 15 partners, depending on the size of the business, that are moving forward as stakeholders in the business that have a vested interest of the ongoing journey of this business.
Right.
And that drives traction towards a deal and drives valuation towards that deal to get a premium offering because buyers are looking for continuity of care.
Yeah, sure are.
And so, and that's been a hot topic in our market for the last 24 months. Doctors staying on board, executive team members staying on board. What does that look like? So I think having the right structure just gives the buyers that sense of security and that desire that they have people that are vested to grow that business in the market.
Well, and certainly a lot to consider. We've kind of talked about control, which is a big issue for doctors, some options around that, looking at scale and exit from a recruitment standpoint. Anything else I need to consider before I begin offering equity in my practices?
Yeah, I think I would sum it this: if you have any concerns or unknowns that you're trying to solve, right?
Mhm.
Reach out to us. Let us do a diagnosis with you to understand what is the thing that you're solving for that hasn't been solved yet. And if we can't address it, we'll tell you you're not ready for it. Because some people are not ready for it. And I've said it in my previous podcast in regards to transacting, and I'll say this in regards to partnerships. Don't bring on a partner if you're not ready for it.
Yeah.
So our goal is to help alleviate those concerns and how partnership can look. And if you're not there at the end of that conversation, you stick with the process you have until you are ready with it.
Yeah, good point. Good advice. Well, Diwakar, it's always great to have you back behind the mic with me, and certainly plenty to think about in terms of partnerships and all the variables and moving parts there, because it's certainly not a one size fits all solution, is it?
No, no. And the partnerships can be great if they're done correctly and can have exponential valuation impact to a deal. So overall, we're big fans of it. Done correctly, it could be amazing.
Definitely, definitely. Well, we appreciate all the questions you all send us, so keep them coming, and we'll keep delivering on that promise to support you and answer them from time to time. As always, if you want to learn about any of our Polaris expert advisory services, or you have questions about this podcast or partnerships, or maybe there's a topic that you haven't heard about yet that you would like us to address, go ahead and send us an email to info@polarishealthcarepartners.com, or you can reach us by visiting the website polarishealthcarepartners.com. Thanks so much for being a loyal listener and subscriber. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a colleague and be sure to leave us a rating on any of your favorite podcast platforms. We'll see you on the next episode of the Group Practice Accelerator Podcast.